I used to believe that the worst thing a man could do to his daughter was to hurt her himself. I was wrong. The worst thing is to know she's being hurt, to have the power to stop it, and to choose a promotion instead. My husband Robert made that choice. He traded our daughter's body for a corner office with a view, and I spent 18 months building a case that would cost him not just that office, but every office he would ever sit in again. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Simone, and this is the story of how I turned my husband's laptop into a weapon, my daughter's silence into testimony, and a boardroom of powerful men into witnesses they never agreed to be. If this channel has ever made you feel less alone, hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. And if you're watching because someone in your life chose their career over your safety, stay until the end. I need you to hear how this ends. Here's my story. Robert and I met in graduate school. He was getting his MBA, I was getting mine in finance, and we were both hungry in the same way, the way that makes you stay in the library until 3 in the morning, comparing internship offers like they were lottery tickets. We married at 26, 2 years after graduation, in a ceremony that cost more than my first car because his parents insisted on doing it right. I wore white. He cried when I walked down the aisle. I thought the tears meant something permanent. Mila was born 2 years later. She had Robert's dark hair and my mother's cheekbones, and when the nurse placed her in my arms, I felt a shift so profound it was like the floor of the world had tilted. I looked at Robert, holding her tiny hand, and I said, I want to stay home. Just for a few years, just until she's in school. He said, of course. We'll make it work. And we did, barely. On one income while I took consulting jobs from home, building financial models during nap times, taking calls in the bathroom with the fan running to cover baby noise. Robert climbed. I stayed. That was the deal we made, the deal I thought we had both signed. He started at a Middelville biotech firm, then moved to a larger one, then to Voss Biotech, where Richard Voss was building an empire on gene therapies and whispered promises. Robert came home with stories about Richard, the visionary, the self-made man, the guy who remembered everyone's name and their kids' names and asked about them at company picnics. He asked about Mila today, Robert said once, loosening his tie in our kitchen. Said he has a daughter her age, wants to set up a playdate. I should have heard the alarm then. I didn't. I was tired, Mila was teething, and the idea of a powerful man noticing my daughter felt like validation, like proof that Robert was important enough to be seen. I said, that would be nice. I was so stupid. I was so tired. I was so grateful for any kindness that I didn't recognize the shape of predation when it wore a suit and asked about my child's hobbies. Richard came to dinner 6 months later. It was a company event, spouses included, but Robert told me Richard had specifically requested our home. He wants to see how the regular people live, Robert said, laughing, not seeing the insult in the words. I cooked for 3 days. I made coq au vin, Robert's favorite, and a chocolate torte that took 6 hours. I wore the dress I had bought for my thesis defense, the one that made me feel like I still belonged in rooms where decisions were made. Richard arrived with wine that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that comes from sailing rather than sunbathing. He shook my hand with both of his, held it too long, and said, Simone, Robert talks about you like you're the reason he gets up in the morning. I can see why. I smiled. I served him dinner. I refilled his glass, and I watched him watch Mila. She was 14 by then, all elbows and awkwardness, hiding in her hoodie at the dinner table. Richard asked her about school, about her plans for university, about whether she had a boyfriend. He asked it the way men ask, with a smile that was supposed to be fatherly, with eyes that lingered on her collarbone when she reached for the water pitcher. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself powerful men were just intense, that his attention was a compliment, that I was being paranoid because I had spent too many years reading about corporate predators in my consulting work. After dinner, Richard hugged Mila goodbye. He held her shoulders and said, You're going to be a heartbreaker, young lady. Your father better lock you up. He laughed. Robert laughed. Mila didn't laugh. She looked at me, her eyes flat and strange, and I told myself it was teenage embarrassment. I told myself a lot of things, until I couldn't anymore. Mila changed over the next 8 months. Slowly, then all at once. She stopped eating dinner with us, claiming homework. She deleted her social media accounts, which I only noticed because I checked them occasionally, the way mothers do, telling myself I was respecting her privacy while I scrolled through her photos. She started wearing baggy clothes, layers even in summer, as if she was trying to disappear inside her own skin. I asked her, gently at first, then with increasing urgency. Mila, what's wrong? Did something happen at school? Is it a boy? You can tell me anything. Nothing's wrong, she would say, not meeting my eyes. I'm fine. I'm just tired. You're not fine. I know you're not fine. Please, baby, let me help. And then the night that changed everything, she looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face and said, I can't tell you, Mom. I promised I wouldn't. And if I break that promise, everything falls apart. Everything. I didn't understand. I thought she was being dramatic, teenage, overwhelmed by hormones and high school politics. I held her. I told her I loved her. I let her go to bed, and I stood in the hallway outside her room, listening to her cry into her pillow, and I did nothing. I did nothing because I didn't know what to do. Because I had spent so many years being reasonable, being understanding, being the wife who supported her husband's career and the mother who trusted her daughter's boundaries, that I had forgotten how to be dangerous. I remembered 3 weeks later. At 2 in the morning, I heard a sound from the bathroom, a sound like scissors, like tearing, like something being destroyed. I ran. Mila was on the floor, her back to the door, her dark hair falling in clumps around her. She was cutting it with kitchen shears, hacking at it unevenly, tears streaming down her face, but her hands steady, methodical, as if she was removing something infected. Mila, I grabbed the scissors. She didn't fight me. She just sat there, breathing hard, looking at her reflection in the mirror, the jagged, uneven mess, the scalp showing through in patches. She looked like a survivor of something I couldn't name. On the counter, next to the toothpaste and her retainer case, was a phone I didn't recognize. A cheap burner phone, the kind you buy at gas stations. I picked it up. Mila didn't stop me. She just kept breathing, staring at herself as if she was waiting for me to catch up. The messages were there, all of them, from a contact labeled only R. The first ones were innocuous, good morning, beautiful, how was school today, the kind of grooming that looks like kindness until you see it in context. Then they changed. I need to see you, the usual place. Don't make me remind you what happens if you say no. Then photos of Mila, clearly taken without her knowledge, in her bedroom, in the school hallway, in our backyard. Then photos she had been forced to send, her face blank, her body positioned like a doll. Then the threats, your father wants to be VP, I make that happen, you make this happen, fair trade. And finally the one that broke me, if you tell your mother she'll blame herself, and she should. She invited me into your home, she served me dinner. She wanted me to like her. Remember that when you're deciding who to trust. I read them all, twice. 3 times. I sat on the bathroom floor next to my daughter, the phone in my. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart, something deeper, something structural. The foundation of the life I had built, the reasonable life, the understanding life, the life where powerful men were just intense and attention was validation and everything was fine if you just worked hard enough and smiled wide enough. How long? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too calm, too flat, like a recording of a voice. 8 months, Mila whispered. Since the dinner. He found me online. He said he wanted to mentor me, help me get into good colleges. Dad said it was a great opportunity, then he said I had to meet him. Alone, and then, she didn't finish, she didn't need to, I had read the messages. I had seen the photos, I knew what then meant. Your father knows, I said, not a question. Mila nodded, her hacked hair falling over her face. He found out. 3 months ago, I told him because I thought he would stop it, but he said. She stopped, she swallowed. He said Richard was important, that his VP promotion was almost finalized, that if I just held on a little longer, everything would be fine. He said I was strong. He said I could handle it. He said. She broke then, the calm shattering, the methodical destruction of her hair finally matched by the destruction inside. I held her. And I stared at the phone in my hand and I thought about Robert, asleep in our bed upstairs, dreaming of corner offices. And I felt a rage so pure it was like drinking ice water after years of thirst. I didn't wake him. I didn't confront him. I put Mila to bed in my room on my side of the mattress and I went downstairs to his laptop. He had left it open, charging, the screen dark. I touched the trackpad. It woke without a password. Robert was careless about security, always had been because he had never had anything to hide, until now. I found the emails within 10 minutes. He hadn't even tried to hide them. A thread between him and Richard, subject line Mila, dated 3 months ago, she told me. She's upset but she'll calm down, she's a good girl, make sure she understands the stakes. Your VP vote is next quarter, we need stability, I've handled it. Simone doesn't know, she won't know, Mila promised. Promises from teenagers are tissue paper, make sure, understood, I scrolled back further. 6 months ago before I knew anything she's resistant, I may need to apply pressure, apply whatever you need. The Singapore deal closes in August. I need you focused. She's my daughter, Richard. Then act like a father and control her, or act like an employee and control yourself. Your choice. I read them until my eyes burned. I read them until the words stopped making sense as language and became shapes, patterns, the architecture of a betrayal so complete it included not just my daughter's body but my own complicity, the dinner I had cooked, the wine I had poured, the nice I had said when Richard asked about a playdate. I had been the doorman. I had held the door open for the man who was destroying my child, and I had smiled while I did it. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark kitchen, and I planned. I had been a financial analyst before I was a mother. I had built models that predicted market crashes, that traced fraud through 10 layers of shell companies, that found the single thread of truth in a tapestry of lies. I had let those skills rust, but I hadn't forgotten them, and now I would use them to dismantle the man who had traded my daughter for a title. I started with Robert's laptop. Over the next 3 months, while Robert went to work and Mila went to school and I pretended that everything was the same, I accessed Voss Biotech's servers through Robert's credentials. I told myself I was protecting him, that if anyone traced the access, it would lead to his account, his negligence, his fault. But the truth was simpler. I wanted him to burn too, not as bright as Richard perhaps, but enough. The patterns emerged quickly once I knew what to look for. Richard had a system. He targeted daughters of employees, girls between 14 and 17, girls with ambitious fathers, girls whose families needed the income, the stability, the promise of advancement. He started with mentorship, then escalated to isolation, then to coercion, then to the trade. Silence for promotion, compliance for security, a daughter's body for a father's corner office. I found 3 previous cases in the records, not explicitly documented. Richard was too careful for that, but visible in the data. A researcher's daughter, 16, who had left for boarding school in Switzerland 2 weeks after her father received a sudden, unexplained bonus. A lab tech's daughter, 15, whose family had relocated to Arizona for her mother's health 1 month after her father was promoted to department head. A nanny's daughter, 14, undocumented, who had simply disappeared, her mother's employment terminated with a generous severance, her file marked return to country of origin. In each case, the father's career had advanced. In each case, the family had left the state, or the country, or simply stopped existing in the company's records. In each case, Richard had continued, untouchable, building his empire on the silence of men who had chosen their ambition over their children's safety. I needed witnesses. I needed women who would speak. I found them through the company's HR records, addresses, emergency contacts, the thin threads of information that connected the disappeared to somewhere they might still be. Elena was first. Her daughter Lucia had been the Switzerland case 6 years ago. Lucia was 22 now, living in Barcelona, studying architecture. Elena had divorced her husband after the boarding school arrangement. She had known something was wrong, had fought for Lucia, had lost when her husband threatened to cut off all financial support. He chose Richard over us. Elena told me over a video call, her voice steady with the particular calm of a woman who has already survived the worst. I chose Lucia. We started over with nothing. But we started over. She agreed to testify. She had kept records, emails, bank statements, the bonus deposit that had appeared the same week Lucia left. I was waiting for someone to ask, she said. I thought no one ever would. Rosa was harder. Her daughter Anna had been the nanny's daughter, the one marked return to country of origin. But Rosa had never returned. She had stayed, undocumented, invisible, working cleaning jobs that paid in cash and asked no questions. I found her through a community center in Queens, through whispers and referrals and the network of women who protect each other because no one else will. She was terrified. Of Richard, of deportation, of losing the fragile life she had built. He said he would call ICE, she told me, her voice barely audible, her eyes on the floor of the community center's basement. He said no one would believe a girl without papers. He said my Anna was already gone, and if I made trouble, I would be gone too. I couldn't promise her legal protection. I wasn't a lawyer, and even if I were, the system was not designed to protect women like Rosa, but I could promise her practical safety. An apartment paid for 6 months in a city where no one knew her name. A job arranged through Elena's contacts that paid enough and asked no questions. A new identity if she needed it, the kind that exists in the margins, built on community rather than documents. I don't want him to hurt more girls, Rosa said finally, but I can't be public. My name, my face, I can't. You don't have to be, I said. You just have to be real. And you are, that's enough. She gave me a statement. Anonymous but detailed. Dates, locations, the pattern that matched the others, it was enough. I built the dossier over 6 months. I worked while Robert slept, while Mila was at school, while the house was empty and silent and full of the ghosts of dinners where I had smiled and poured wine and not seen what was in front of me. I traced financial transactions, correlated dates, built a timeline that showed not just Richard's crimes, but the company's complicity. The bonuses, the promotions, the sudden departures, the board members who had voted on each advancement without asking why. I found the journalist through a contact from my consulting days. A woman named Priya who had written about corporate fraud, who had been sued twice and won, who understood that some stories only get told when someone is willing to lose everything to tell them. I gave her the dossier in pieces, each piece verified, each source protected. She spent 2 months confirming, cross-referencing, building her own case alongside mine. And then the final piece. Mila. I didn't ask her to speak. I told her about the dossier, about Elena and Rosa, about the other girls who had been silenced. I told her that I was going to expose Richard, with or without her testimony, but that her voice would make it real in a way that documents never could. You don't have to, I said. I will protect you either way, but if you want to speak, I will make sure the world hears you. She was 15 by then. Her hair had grown back, uneven, dyed a deep blue that she had chosen herself. She was in therapy 3 times a week, working through something that would take years, maybe decades, maybe forever. She was not okay. She would not be okay for a long time. But she was here, she was alive, and she was angry. I want to, she said, not for me, for the ones who couldn't, for Anna who disappeared, for Lucia who had to start over in a country where she didn't speak the language. For the ones we don't know about yet. I want them to know that someone saw, that someone believed. We recorded the video in Priya's apartment on a camera with no network connection, the file stored on an encrypted drive that I kept on my body at all times. Mila sat in front of a plain wall, wearing a black t-shirt, no makeup, her blue hair pulled back. She looked young and old at the same time, the way trauma makes you. My name is Mila Chen, she said. Richard Voss raped me for 8 months. He told me my father wanted to be VP and that my body was the price. My father knew. He found out 3 months in, and he told me to hold on, to be strong, to not ruin things for the family. He chose Richard's promotion over my safety, and I'm speaking now because my mother taught me that silence is just another form of violence, and I'm done being violent to myself. She didn't cry. I did, standing behind the camera, my hand pressed to my mouth to keep from making noise. She didn't cry. She just looked into the lens and said, I am not a trade. I am not a bonus. I am not a stepping stone to someone else's success. I am Mila Chen, and I am done being quiet. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. Robert had been excited about it for weeks, his VP vote, finally, the culmination of years of work. He bought a new suit. He practiced his presentation in the mirror. He kissed me goodbye that morning and said, wish me luck, babe, today's the day. I wished him luck. I meant it in a way. I wished him the luck of facing what he had done in a room full of people who would finally see it. I had used his laptop to schedule the meeting. I had sent invitations to every board member, every senior executive, every major shareholder. I had attached an agenda item labeled Special Financial Review, Confidential. And I had arranged for the room to be equipped with a video screen, a sound system, and a direct feed to Priya's server, where the dossier and Mila's video waited. Robert didn't know any of this. He walked into that room believing he was about to become vice president of Voss Biotech. He walked out unemployed, under investigation, and estranged from every relationship that had ever mattered to him. I wasn't there. I watched from a livestream that Priya had arranged, sitting in my kitchen with Mila beside me, holding her hand as the screen lit up with the boardroom. The board members filed in, confused by the additional attendees, the unfamiliar agenda. Richard arrived last, smiling, shaking hands, taking his seat at the head of the table. Then the lights dimmed. The screen came alive, and my dossier began to play. I had structured it like a financial presentation, the way I knew these men thought, in numbers and trends and return on investment. Pattern analysis. Executive advancement correlated with minor employee departures. Slide after slide of data, dates, bonuses, promotions. The Switzerland transfer, the Arizona relocation, the undocumented disappearance. Each case documented, each correlation undeniable. Then the statements. Elena's voice, clear and steady, describing the bonus that had bought her daughter's silence. Rosa's statement, read by Priya to protect her anonymity, detailing the threats, the fear, the choice between deportation and justice. And finally, Mila. She appeared on the screen larger than life, her blue hair vivid against the plain wall, her voice filling the boardroom through speakers that made it impossible to look away. My name is Mila Chen, she began, and I watched Richard's face change. I watched the smile freeze, then crack, then disappear entirely. I watched him reach for his phone, probably to call security, probably to call his lawyer, probably to call someone who could make this go away. But there was no making this go away. The video played to the end. The room was silent. Then one of the board members, a woman named Helen, the only woman on the board, a detail I had noted and used, stood up and said, "Richard, you have 30 seconds to leave this building before I call the police." And Robert, she turned to my husband, who was gray-faced, trembling, his new suit suddenly looking like a costume. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Richard stood. He looked at the screen where Mila's frozen image still stared out and he said, "This is a setup. These are lies. You can't believe." "I believe the documents," Helen said. "I believe the pattern, and I believe her." She pointed at Mila's face. "Get out. Both of you." Now, they left. Not quietly. Robert tried to speak, to explain, to say something that might salvage the wreckage of his life. But Helen had already turned to the other board members, already begun the process of damage control, of legal consultation, of cutting ties with the men who had cost them more than they knew. The live stream ended. I sat in my kitchen, Mila's hand in mine, and I waited for the feeling to come. Relief, maybe, victory, satisfaction. But there was nothing. Just emptiness and the distant sound of a door closing somewhere in the house, though no one had moved. Richard was arrested 3 days later. The charges were complex: statutory rape, coercion, financial fraud, witness tampering, but the evidence was comprehensive. Priya's article broke the same day, and the story spread faster than Voss Biotech's lawyers could contain it. Other victims came forward. Employees resigned. Stock prices fell. Within 6 months, the company was sold for parts. Richard was awaiting trial, and Robert was facing charges of conspiracy and accessory after the fact. I testified at the preliminary hearing. Mila didn't. She was too young. The defense would have torn her apart, and the prosecution had enough without her. But she sat in the gallery, her blue hair covered by a hat, her hand in mine, while I described what I had found, what I had built, what I had done with the skills I had let rust for 15 years. Robert looked at me from the defendant's table. He looked older, thinner, the kind of man who had lost not just his job but his entire architecture of self. He mouthed something, "I'm sorry," maybe, or "why," or just my name. I didn't respond. I had spent 18 months responding to him, performing the role of supportive wife while I built the case that would destroy him. I had no performances left. He was convicted of conspiracy. 6 years, reduced to 4 for good behavior. Richard got 20, though he died in prison before serving half of it. A heart attack, the newspapers said, though the women who wrote to me after his death suggested other causes, other prisoners, other forms of justice that the legal system couldn't provide. Mila and I moved. Not far, another state, close enough to Elena's daughter Lucia, who had become Mila's friend through the strange solidarity of survivors. We rented a small apartment with good light and a kitchen that smelled like nothing, which was exactly what we needed. Mila went back to school, then to community college, then to a university program for trauma survivors. She studied social work. She said she wanted to be the person she had needed, the person who believed before being asked, who saw before being told. I went back to work. Not in corporate finance. I couldn't stomach the world that had enabled all of this. The bonuses and promotions and corner offices built on silence. I found a position with an NGO that investigated corporate corruption, specifically the kind that targeted vulnerable communities. I made less than I had as a consultant, less than Robert had made at Voss. But I woke up every morning knowing that my work protected someone, somewhere, from the men who traded lives for profit. It wasn't healing. I don't believe in healing, not the way people mean it. Mila still had nightmares. I still woke up at 3 in the morning, checking her breathing, checking the locks, checking that the world hadn't tilted again while I wasn't looking. We didn't talk about Robert. We didn't talk about the dinner where I had poured wine for the man who was destroying my daughter. Some things are too large for conversation. They just exist, like furniture, like weather, like the shape of a room you can't change. But we were here, we were alive, and we were no longer silent. 5 years after the boardroom, I received a letter. It came to our apartment, forwarded from our old address, the handwriting familiar in a way that made my stomach clench before my mind caught up. Robert. From prison. I almost threw it away unopened. I had thrown away everything else, his clothes, his books, the photographs where we smiled at each other with the particular blindness of people who don't yet know what they will do. But something made me open it. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need to see the shape of his regret to measure it against the shape of my rage. It was short, 3 paragraphs. I'm sorry appeared 4 times, I was weak twice, I want to see Mila once. And at the end, we're still family, Simone. We should be together for her sake, for what we had. I read it twice. Then I took it to the kitchen, where Mila was making coffee, her blue hair now streaked with natural brown. Her body relaxed in a way I had never seen when she was 15, 16, 17. From him, she asked, not looking up. Yes, do you want me to read it? No, I said. And then, because she was 20 and had earned the right to choose, unless you want to, she shook her head. She turned on the stove, the blue flame catching, and she said, I don't need his words. I have yours. I held the letter over the flame. It caught quickly, curling black, the I'm sorries disappearing into ash. Mila watched without speaking. When it was gone, I dropped the remains in the sink and ran water over them, watching the gray slurry circle the drain. We didn't win, I said. It was something I had realized slowly over years, the way you realize that a scar is permanent. We didn't get justice. We got consequences. For them, not for us. What happened to you that doesn't get fixed by prison sentences or newspaper articles, that stays? Mila nodded. She handed me a cup of coffee, black, the way I drank it now. But we stopped losing, she said. Right, we stopped being the ones who paid. Yes, I said, we stopped losing. We stood in the kitchen, the morning light coming through a window that faced no oak tree, that held no initials, that was just glass and frame and the ordinary miracle of another day. Mila leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she had when she was small, before Richard, before Robert, before I learned that the worst thing a man can do is not always done with his own hands. I love you, Mom, she said. I love you too, I said. Always, in every room, in every version of this life. She smiled, small and real, and I thought about the girl who had carved her initials into a window frame, believing in permanence. I thought about all the women who had believed, who had been wrong, who had rebuilt anyway. I thought about Rosa, somewhere in a city where no one knew her name, working a job that asked no questions, free in the only way that mattered. I thought about Elena, in Barcelona with her daughter, both of them architects now, building structures that held people instead of hiding them. We didn't win, but we stopped losing. And sometimes, in the world we had been given, that was enough.